Hey there, Jordan Chariton live, joined by the great Tina-Desiree Berg. We are going to have double Desiree Berg today. You will be
Yeah.
hosting Right Wing Insanity in 3 hours from now. We will preview that once we get the audience up, but that's going to be great because you are having a great guest to kind
Yeah.
of shed light on what we would call the left to right pipeline. Of leftists now, some winking, some bear hugging the right wing. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I thought it would be good to come on now because there's breaking news.
Yeah.
On paper, it sounds good, but you kind of have to, go under the hood to find out that even though it's somewhat a step in the right direction, it's still far from what we need. And of course, we're talking about the continued slaughter, genocide that Israel is perpetrating on Gaza. I want to read this from The Intercept. This broke just like within the last hour.
Right.
The United Nations has passed a resolution that is should expedite aid into Gaza. The U.S., after blocking it for days, meaning Biden blocking it for days
Right.
and watering it down, they didn't vote yes, but they abstained, which is still kind of a big deal because Israel 99.9% of the time votes no on anything that could technically be deemed as anti or not super duper supporting Israel. So let me read from The Intercept. Joe Biden abstains from watered down UN Gaza resolution, then takes credit anyway. Sounds about
Yeah.
and smash the like button, share this live stream so we can get this out to more people. Super, super important. An estimated 570,000 people in the Gaza Strip are now starving. 3/4 of the territory's 36 hospitals are closed. The remaining 9, all in southern Gaza, are partially functional. The shuttered hospitals in the north are serving as impromptu shelters for some of the 85% of Palestinians in Gaza who have been displaced but did not trek south to escape the ravages of Israel's ground invasion. Beyond an estimated death toll of 20,000, according to the Gaza Ministry of Health, and also confirmed by other organizations, a devastating 355,000 are suffering from infectious diseases as conditions in the territory worsen. Amid all of this suffering, President Biden delayed a United Nations vote for humanitarian aid to Gaza at least 8 times, watering it down until he felt satisfied enough to not veto it. The vote is on a UN Security Council proposal put forward by the United Arab Emirates and repeatedly whittled down just for Joe Biden that calls for limiting the hostilities in Gaza and expanding aid distribution. Officials reportedly crafted the resolution in such a way that it would be, quote, tolerable enough for the Biden administration to avoid a veto. The U.S. has long been Israel's guarantor at the Security Council, using its veto as a permanent member of the council to block almost every measure critical of Israel. For Biden, the preemptive concessions were not enough, and he continued to delay the United Arab Emirates resolution. The main sticking point for Biden was the resolution use of the word cessation. Unbelievable.
It is unbelievable.
Fighting and on allowing an independent inspection of aid going into Gaza, rather than the Israel-administered checks that have slowed aid shipments to a crawl. As negotiations edged into Thursday evening, the vote was kicked once again to Friday, but not without reward for Biden. He was able to force out language that does not establish a mechanism for UN inspection of aid, nor calls for the suspension of hostilities. On Friday, the fateful vote was finally held after the U.S. first vetoed a Russian amendment to restore the resolution's originally stronger language for a suspension. Indeed, the 15 member nations instead voted on a resolution calling for, quote, the conditions for a sustainable cessation of hostilities. The resolution passed 13-0 to 2. Russia abstained, so did the United States. Let's play a clip from United States Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, which I think is very disingenuous, but here we go.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, fellow council colleagues. This was tough, but we got there. Since the start of this conflict, The United States has done work tirelessly to alleviate this humanitarian crisis, to get life-saving assistance into Gaza and to get hostages out of Gaza, to push for the protection of innocent civilians and humanitarian workers, and to work towards a lasting peace. Today's vote bolsters those efforts and lends support to our direct diplomacy. And I want to thank the UAE and others for working with us in good faith to craft a strong humanitarian-focused resolution. It took many days and many long nights of negotiating to get this right. But today, this Council provided a glimmer of hope amongst a sea of unimaginable suffering.
A sea of unimaginable suffering that we've supported. I mean, this is just shameless.
Just for the record, I mean, just the 5-6 days of blocking it, that makes the difference for a lot of people who are going to die of famine. Because in Gaza, I don't have the numbers, but it is most of Gaza right now are starving.
Yes.
So Biden,
they were starving before this happened. Now they're really starving. I mean, that's.
But Biden is blocking this because it's not the U.S. You know, the United States. Biden blocking it for days, literally over the word cessation,
which is insane.
Other ridiculous things. Yeah. Is the difference between life or death for God knows how many people. On one end, if you want to take the, I guess, incrementalist approach, which is not us, you could say, well, it's rare. I can't remember the last time the U.S. abstained because Israel doesn't want this.
Right.
So maybe that's due to pressure Biden is getting, these protests that Status Coup, by the way. Thank you, John Farina, has been leading the charge. I think over this, at this point, we've probably covered over 10 just in New York City and D.C. Pro-Palestinian protests, calls for ceasefire. Last night, we covered the actually UAW protest calling for a ceasefire, which had looked like hundreds, if not a few thousand people. But on one end, the U.S. moving at all to vote, technically by abstaining, that allowed it to pass. So the U.S. de facto was supporting it by allowing it to pass. That's against Israel because Israel doesn't want it. But at the end of the day, who really cares? You're delaying, and it moves us no further to ending this.
No. In fact, it's been getting worse for a very long time now. I don't think, what happened in October happened in a bubble. There's been decades of clear evidence that this was eventually going to happen. These are dislocated individuals that have been put into a very small piece of land. The blockade has basically controlled their electricity, the amount of food and water that come into the territory, whatnot. You can't leave. This idea that why don't people just leave? Well, they can't. If they try to leave by boat, they get shot at by the IDF. They monitor after a certain amount of space where they'll just shoot people. The Rafah closing might as well be closed by the controlled and closed by the Israeli government. You can't leave that way. So there's really no place for these folks to go. And in each rung of the ratchet up, it's become worse and more extreme. There was a poll, Jordan, I don't know if you saw this a couple of days ago, in which the question was posed to young Americans, do you find what Hamas did in October justified? And 50% of the young under 35 said yes to this, which should be very eye-opening for a lot of folks. I'm never going to say an act of domestic terrorism or terrorism at all is justified because I think there's other ways to handle things. But it does sort of speak to the idea that people understand why this has turned into the rage kettle that it has turned into. And that's not even talking about the West Bank, where you have all kinds of illegal settlements that have been expanding. Many of these settlers act like terrorists over there. They have guns, they shoot at people. The Goldstein incident, which I'm not sure how many people know about, where was a mass shooting that allowed for Hebron to be closed down to the Palestinians, the victims of the shooting, and opened up for settlers, not the reverse of what should have happened. So many, many things have been happening. And I don't think U.S. policy in this area is necessarily based on being pro-Jewish. I think they just want a military base in the Middle East, and this is how they get it. Hell be damned for whatever that means for the Jewish people, because let's be honest, no group is monolithic, and many American Jews are not okay with what happens there. It's like, to me, it's like supporting a right-wing fascist government that's much further to the right than Trump is. Why do Democrats in the United States that, say they're progressive or leftist support a foreign government that is far worse than anything we've had in the United States? It just doesn't logically make sense.
Well, also, I mean, if you know the history, which I've done my research the last few weeks, it's not only that Israel, the United States has long locked arms with Israel because it's, militarily an outpost. It's right there by the Suez Canal.
Yeah.
I mean, why did Britain want a mandate on Palestine?
Right.
It was
the
right
Suez
there
Canal.
with their oil. Why is Israel in that area so important? Because the Suez Canal is right there, the path to some of the world's most abundant sources of oil and other natural resources. So it's not just that, let's forget the pretense of like, oh, the only democracy in the Middle East. Oil, military outposts, all that. But something that really strikes me about this is I think that, and again, I'm not painting a broad brush because we have a lot of viewers and there's a lot of baby boomers and older people who are progressive, who are with it, empathetic, and do not support any of this. But just like the baby boomer generation was indoctrinated by a lot of the media, political, Red Scare, the Russian boogeyman, Cold War, communism is evil, all that stuff. A lot of that generation also did not have access to social media and all this abundance of information to really know the history. All they heard was what they heard from the U.S. government, the U.S. government, the 3 or 4 propaganda broadcast networks that, Israel is a vibrant democracy and, America in the Middle East. And like we learned not the truth in grade school about what happened to the Native Americans here. Certainly the baby boomer generation, that is, certainly didn't learn the truth about what happened to the Palestinians. So I think why you're seeing such a seesaw in terms of young people, and not even just like Gen Z, but millennials, people under 40, I would say, is because they have access to so much more information, the history of what happened. And putting all that aside, young or old, I mean, you see it right in front of you.
You see it right in front of you. Yeah.
Rubble and bulldozers bulldozing over Israeli bulldozers bulldozing over hospital patients. Gunshots of the Israeli army against, I think it was 2 women at a church in Gaza that killed them. I mean, I could go on and on. Mindy says, excuse me, Jordan, but some of us old geezers know how to read and have always done a lot. Mindy, he said, I'm not getting a broad brush. And I love you geezers. I guess I was trying to say why I think you're seeing such a surge among young people.
The polling that I mentioned. Yeah, it's definitely.
There's a lot of boomers for Bernie too, but a lot of boomers were indoctrinated, not only about the Cold War and the Red Scare and all that, but, to be pro-Israel. I want to show you this, Tina, because it's really just vile. Colin, just from CNN. Headline, not seen since Vietnam. Israel dropped hundreds of 2,000-pound bombs on Gaza, analysis shows. In the first months of its war in Gaza, Israel dropped hundreds of massive bombs, many of them capable of killing or wounding people more than 1,000 feet away. More than 1,000 feet away. Analysis by CNN and artificial intelligence company Synthetic suggests, shocking CNN's reporting this, but credit to them, satellite imagery from those early days of the war reveals more than 500 impact craters over 12 meters in diameter, consistent with those left behind by 2,000-pound bombs. Those are 4 times heavier than the largest bombs the U.S. dropped on ISIS in Mosul, Iraq, during the war against the extremist groups there. Weapons and warfare experts blame the extensive use of heavy munitions, such as the 2,000-pound bombs, for the soaring death toll. I mean, listen, I'm not going to get into the fights I've had with my mother, with my father, with my brother, who I all love. So if you're watching, we just have to agree to disagree on this. But I don't really know how you can objectively say any government, any military is doing everything humanly possible to limit innocent deaths or what they call collateral damage, if they're dropping 2,000-pound bombs that could kill someone 1,000 feet away.
No, it's nonsense.
I would not call that being careful, or what do they call it? Tactile or precision bombing. I'd call that just a rampage and bomb.
It's really frustrating to me just because I think, the Hospro, this is the word for propaganda, right? Americans have not been exposed to a lot of truth telling when it comes to this conflict and haven't been for decades, right? And that is by design, let's be honest. So that's part of what you're talking about here. I want to point out something. This is how casually this conversation becomes problematic to me. When we talk about an occupied territory, this is not a sovereign nation. Gaza, the West Bank are occupied territories. They are not sovereign nations. So we have to stop really looking at them that way. They are living under a military occupation. They are judged by different laws than the Israeli Jewish folks are. That is absolutely not up for debate. So when we have somebody in our chat basically saying Israel's a good guy because they gave them free water and electricity, that's nonsense. What they did is contain how much water and electricity that they get. If you can turn off the tap and turn off the electricity of a region that you military occupied, you are no longer being the good guy. That's just a nonsense comment. But I think, moreover, what we need to understand is what Hamas did was an act of terrorism. So to me, the response that's now being what's happening now in response to this to me is like saying, like, hey, we have some oath keepers in the American Redoubt. We have some, neo-Nazis up there that are anti-government. They're planning on doing some pipe bomb attack. Maybe they do a Timothy McVeigh. They do something of this nature. How would everybody feel if the U.S. government just went into Idaho and Eastern Washington and just started bombing the fuck out of the entire state and said in response, it's fine, we're going after the terrorists. They're all terrorists there. They're all part of the American Redoubt. Well, nobody would stand for that because that would be an insane response.
People would feel that's basically what they did in Waco after they got fed up.
Right, but I'm saying, what if they expanded Waco into the entire state of Texas? Let's bomb everything around there. Like, who cares if innocent children die? That's no big deal. The innocent children are also terrorists. I mean, that's sort of, if you really soberly think through the rhetoric that's being put out there, that is what's being said. And meanwhile, you've had Israeli citizens that have been killed. What are they doing to get their hostages back?
Well, I think at the end of the day, what you have to boil it down, I can't get in Benjamin Netanyahu's head, and I certainly don't want to.
Yeah, no kidding.
If you want to talk about the Zionist mentality, which I've been
it's very racist. Yeah,
raised in a Zionist family. My father, if he could have had his way, would have moved us to Israel. It did not rub off on me. I love him. I honestly, for the last decade, I've avoided even discussing Israel with him because what's the point? I'm not going to change his mind. He's not going to change mine, and let's focus on other areas of love. Yeah. Same thing with my mother, my brother. We just don't agree. However, I think at the end of the day, you cannot. There is no. You can't eradicate an idea. Right. You can't bomb. And I said this when I was at TYT. You cannot. You're just basically. In the cloak of killing, defeating terrorists on Israel's end, you're just creating more terrorism.
I agree.
And to me,
it's reactionary.
To me, in America, we are against, or you should be against, in my view. There should be a separation of church and state. Right. Well, when you have people leading a country like Israel, and to be clear, I mean, the Jews have been oppressed and eradicated for generations and generations. But when you have religious fanatics who believe God gave us the land running the government, this is what's going to happen. But to me, I think that what they're doing is very much making Israelis and Jewish people, not just in Israel, but around the world, less safe.
I agree.
As I'm about to show you,
I agree.
U.S. intelligence analysis warns Hamas influence has grown since its attack on Israel. It's gotten more popular, Hamas.
Yeah.
A flurry of new analysis by U.S. intelligence agencies has warned that Hamas's credibility and influence has grown dramatically in the 2 months since the October 7th attacks. Israel's relentless air campaign has killed thousands of civilians inside Gaza. Hamas, which is designated as a terrorist group by the U.S. and Europe, has been able to cast itself as a lone armed group fighting back against a brutal oppressor, killing women and children. Officials familiar with the different assessments say the group has successfully positioned itself across some parts of the Arab and Muslim world as a defender of the Palestinian cause and an effective fighter against Israel.
Right.
Well, why do you think that is? Do you think it's because on October 7th, maybe Israel had the world's sympathy and was looked at as the victim, but once this slaughter began, you very quickly, Israel, lose that position, and people forget what Hamas did because they're looking at what you're doing.
They're looking at what you're doing. You're not wrong on that. It is absolutely going to create more terrorism. I mean, it kind of takes me back to, 20 years ago. So the Palestinian Authority, which is a secular organization, and I think it bears to realize, like, people need to understand that all Palestinians aren't Muslim. That's just not true. I know that it's easy to paint, well, the Hamas, Islamic militants, they represent Palestine. That's not true. There are a lot of Christians that are in Palestine and have traditionally been there. So it's more complicated than that. But the Palestinian Authority, that was a secular organization that has always wanted to negotiate peace, that, at one time supported a two-state solution where, Israel gets their land, the Palestinian gets there, and everybody goes on, lives in peace. But the hardliners, the right-wing, again, the right-wing extremists didn't want that. They wanted all the land, right? And that's really clear. That's not a crazy statement that I'm making. That's always been the case. There's a great book called The General's Son, by Miko Palad, that is a really good read on this. He's the son of one of the original Zionist generals, and he talks about all of these things. And he's now currently working as a Palestinian rights activist, even though he's Israeli and Jewish. So again, no group is monolithic. People need to realize that there are forces inside Israel that are pushing against this stuff because they also see it for what it is, what we're discussing here today. And I think the logic here is that there's too many settlements now. It's going to be one state, the two-state solution. That ship sailed. It's just not possible at this point. I think there is some reality to that because of the expansion of the settlements. They're literally everywhere at this point. But I also don't know how you talk these incredibly racist right-wing extremists off the ledge. I mean, the ultra-nationalism that exists. And, Likud, which is Netanyahu's party, there are parties that are farther to the right than that are part of his coalition. We're talking about individuals that have no problem using dehumanizing language when it comes to discussing Palestinians, calling them little snakes, little beasts. At their protests, you'll hear them screaming, "Kill all the Arabs," like incredibly extremist rhetoric, right? That's coming out of this faction. Right. And how does that mentality exist? How does that grow and flourish? What kind of an environment are these individuals in that they're raised to believe that these things are true? It's a little bit scary to me. Right. But I also think we have to consider the fact you're bringing up, the pogroms, the history of anti-Semitism in Europe. That is 100% a driving force. I don't think it should be used as an excuse to justify what's going on now. That seems really wrong to me. But we also have to remember that the Balfour Agreement, the reason Israel, this colonial state, exists is because after World War II, so many states wouldn't take Jewish settlers in. They wouldn't allow them into the country, including the United States. So where were all of these individuals to go? So, a lot of the xenophobic, anti-Semitic Europeans also supported a Zionist state because they thought it would be a solution to their problem. You know what I'm saying? So this is
the original in 1947, 1948. The Palestinians living in Palestine, they felt for the Jews. And
I agree. They were living in peace.
And wanted them to get refuge after the Holocaust. They just didn't want, understandably, for themselves to be expelled.
Exactly.
So it's this vicious cycle of hate, genocide,
hurt people,
which were the Jews, and then a domino effect where to give the Jews a home, we expel the Palestinians, and we go on this hamster wheel. But to me, what I think this should not be forgotten, and I've looked into this and done research, the few times that there was momentum in terms of peace negotiations where there could truly be a Jewish state, an Arab state next to each other, majority of the Palestinians supported it. Like the Palestinians.
No, they did. Absolutely, they did. They want peace.
The problem was with Oslo, I mean, it was a joke. They didn't offer the Palestinians a real state. They offered them splintered, what they called, I think, wontons, but isolated land that was not connected.
Not connected.
Israel, Israel land between it and all sorts of security. So there is no military solution here. The only solution is political. I know some people want all the Jews gone and Israel gone and give it all back to the Palestinians. I mean, I don't think that's practical. I also don't think, like, the Israeli people are not the guilty people here. There's a lot of guilt to go around, but I'm not calling for the people of Israel, which some include my family, to be expelled out of Israel. But the West Bank needs to go back. The Palestinians need to have a state pre-1967 lines that includes the West Bank, Gaza, and parts of Jerusalem. And I believe, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm a dreamer, I believe if that happened, I mean, a lot of this terrorist fervor
would end. I agree.
Will dramatically go down.
Oh, but absolutely.
And I'll just be open. I love my mother, but we got into it the other day because she said the common thing you hear from Jews, and I don't believe my mother is for killing children. I don't believe most pro-Israel Jews in their mind wake up and say, how many Palestinian kids we...
I mean, a handful of them do, but they're crazy right-wing extremists.
Yes, but I'm saying the majority of people, I don't think consciously wake up.
I agree.
Hey, let's kill all these kids. But they say, my mom said to me, well, what would you do? What should they have done? And I said to her, well, I think a good principle is the notion after being attacked. Look at America, for example, after 9/11, we got to do something. Right. Well, sometimes doing something isn't the right answer if that something is not thought out.
Yeah.
To me, and there's no perfect answer, but what I have done, if I was the prime minister of Israel, was I would have, before I dropped one bomb, before I did anything, I would have, with the United States, Britain, France, a lot of other allies, I would have put a full throttle pressure campaign on Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, you name it, to open passage to Palestinians in Gaza temporarily, to be clear, to try to get as many people out as humanly possible before, not with bombs, but the military go in there for surgical counterterrorism to try and find and locate Hamas members.
But Jordan, don't you sort of think they know where the Hamas members are? I mean, these tunnels have existed for a long time. They've been used to, not necessarily for military operation, but to go around the blockade to get goods into the country. I don't know. I mean, I just feel like they know that and they don't care.
Oh, I agree. And I also think part of this is Netanyahu. I mean, let's be clear. He's fighting for his freedom, because if
he's facing corruption charges.
He's removed as prime minister. He's facing corruption charges. That's the whole reason, by the way, that he was doing this cockamamie. Let's basically make the Israel's version of the Supreme Court powerless, take away their power, so he couldn't be indicted on corruption charges. So he's fighting for his basic survival. Hey, if America, we've done all these coups all around the world, let's do a coup in Israel, a good one. Get rid of Netanyahu and maybe put somebody in with half a brain. I mean, you're never going to put in somebody who would do it the way we want it, but maybe putting in somebody who's less of a right-wing extremist,
lunatic,
around with religious Orthodox extremists, maybe that would do the trick. But I'll tell you, I don't know, what I would say to my mom and what I would say to people. What would you have them do? Well, do you honestly think if the true desire here is to get rid of Hamas, well, Hamas's leaders are not in Gaza; they're in Qatar. They're in other countries. Getting rid of Hamas fighters. Well, reports say there's about 30 to 40,000 of them in Gaza. So I believe, from what I've read, Israel thinks it's killed maybe over 1,000 at this point. So if you're going to kill 30,000 by my math, you would have to kill hundreds of thousands of innocent people.
All of them. Yeah, no. I mean, but this isn't even going to deal with the root of the problem. The only way to deal, we shouldn't have ever reached this point. We didn't have to get to this point. The problem is that the extremists in Israel want all the land, and they're now calling this the second Nakba, which means they want to take all of Gaza. They want to get rid of all the Palestinians. In fact, there was a plan that was circulating the U.S. Congress about resettlement of the Palestinians in Gaza, like requiring aid from the U.S. to say to Egypt, you're taking 1 million Palestinian settlers in. I mean, this is ethnic cleansing. Come on, man. These people are from that land too. They also should have been given a right to return, as far as I'm concerned. They're not.
Well,
I mean,
I want to read this because I actually think this might be where it's headed.
Okay.
Definitely if Trump is president, because he doesn't give a shit, but possibly if Biden
Wait, hang on. Trump, not only does he not give a shit, Trump expanded the illegal settlements into Syria. I think a lot of people forget that he did this. The Trump Heights in the Golan Heights, that's not even occupied West Bank territory now. We're not talking about occupied Golan Heights area. So he's all for like expanding the settlements.
And he moved the embassy, by the way.
And he moved the embassy to Jerusalem. Yeah, he absolutely did. He's aggravated this. So people that are saying that he's anti-war are crazy, as far as I'm concerned.
People could vote for whoever they want, but do not be delusional that
right.
It'd be any different if Trump were president right now. It'd probably be worse, actually.
It'd be worse.
But I want to read this from the Atlantic. I don't really like the Atlantic, but on this, it's a good piece. The right-wing Israeli campaign to resettle Gaza.
There you go.
A lot of these people that I truly believe that's Netanyahu's goal. He could say
yes.
it's not. But
I agree.
What else are you trying to do by basically leaving it to rubble? And then saying, no, we can't have the Palestinian Authority back in here to rule Gaza. And we need a neutral party. Well, sometimes that neutral party is being Israel. But I want to read this.
That's ridiculous.
This week, a Hebrew University poll found that Israelis oppose efforts to resettle Gaza after the current war by a commanding margin of 56 to 33%. This consensus accords with the U.S. policy and the official stance of the Israeli government. Turning back the clock and rebuilding Gaza's Israeli communities, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recently said, is not a realistic goal. Most Israelis know that constructing and protecting small Jewish enclaves in such a hostile environment would be a moral and military nightmare. Given this information, a reasonable observer might conclude that the possibility is off the table. It's not. That's because the Netanyahu government is uniquely beholden to a radical minority of Israelis who are committed to resettling the Gaza Strip, even if this means displacing or expelling Palestinians.
Yep.
When the minority speaks, Netanyahu listens. His coalition received only 48% of the vote in Israel's previous election, and its hold on power hinges on an alliance of hard right parties whose constituents form the backbone of the Back to Gaza movement. The movement started soon after Israel left Gaza in 2005, but is no longer quixotic. These activists are gearing up for a fight, and although their success is unlikely, it's far from impossible. Quote, I sat next to the prime minister and told him, the sole picture of victory in this war that will allow us to lift our heads, to recover Jewish pride, and to return to the true source of our strength is settlement across the entire Gaza Strip. The far-right parliament member Limor Son Har Melech said last week on a video. So you have a prime minister desperate to hold power. He's weakened the judicial Supreme Court of Israel, whatever you call it. And the very coalition that determines whether he stays as prime minister or not, the Orthodox Jews, the far-right settlers, they're looking at this as like Rahm Emanuel, don't let any good crisis go to waste. Let's annex Gaza.
Oh, yeah, they definitely want to annex Gaza. I mean, part of this is conversation, too, is what I call messianic Jewish settlers. Like, these are folks that aren't even looking to the Torah to justify why the land is theirs. Like, they're looking to the Christian Bible, which is kind of bizarre, right? We have a whole movement of Christian Zionists here in the United States. They're also Christian nationalists, not to be confused, but that, they want this to happen because they believe that that is how the second coming of Christ comes. No mention, of course, when you talk to these Messianic Jews about the fact that these Christian nationalists also think that unless they accept Jesus Christ as their savior, they're going to burn in hell. I mean, let's just table that for a minute. But it's just pardon my French, a clusterfuck of crazy at this point. And these extremists have a lion's share hold over the government because of what you're talking about. We also have members of his cabinet that were expelled from holding political office because of their extreme genocidal comments. So, you know, they were banned. So,
I'm sorry to pivot, Tina, but we do have breaking news.
Oh.
Totally different subject, but breaking news. The Supreme Court rejects a request. Supreme Court rejects a request by special counsel Jack Smith to decide whether Trump is immune from federal prosecution over efforts to overturn the 2020 election before the lower appeals court issues its ruling. In English, the special counsel, particularly in the case of Trump and January 6th, he wants to get the case started, the trial started before the election. Right. So he wanted to go straight to the Supreme Court because waiting for a lower court to decide on confirming whether he's immune or not. And then it would go to the Supreme Court. It would delay it past the election. So the Supreme Court, by my reading of that, is refusing to.
It's not good.
Yeah, it's refusing to even weigh it until the lower court, which probably means Trump isn't going to go on trial.
No, because if he wins the election, it becomes a moot conversation. That's what pushing the trial out is the end game right there.
Yeah. If
he gets elected and the trial hasn't happened, all of that's going away. And we're going to probably look at a DOJ and an FBI that is going to be markedly different than what it is today, because I do think he thinks law enforcement isn't about laws being applied universally to every group, every individual. It's about the law. For him, it's like, I need law enforcement to be an army of what I believe. I mean, typical fascist stuff, right? I don't think that's an exaggeration of what he wants. I think he's made it pretty clear that that's what he wants.
And I would put everything I own. The Supreme Court's going to overturn the Colorado decision to keep Trump on.
Yeah, they'll hear that.
Yeah, but moving back to this, I remember what I was going to say. I can't get in the mind of Benjamin Netanyahu, and I wouldn't want to. But I truly believe what you're seeing in Israel right now, and what a lot of even people that I care about, and people that I love, and people that I don't think at their core are bad people. I think the mentality is better their kids than ours. And when you have that as your mentality,
but it never stops at that.
But when you have that as your mentality, I think what you're not realizing is it's endangering your kids more.
Exactly. Absolutely. Because
it is. Do you think truly, now that we've already shown you Hamas's popularity and credibility is supporting, and contrary to some people that, I've talked to, I love Steve Grumbine, but I disagree with him on this. I don't support what Hamas did. I understand the desire for resistance.
Yeah.
I am a white guy. I've never been occupied. I understand what some might say. Well, what would you have the oppressed and occupied Palestinians do, Jordan? I don't have all the answers, but I can tell you, as a guiding principle, not just for this, but in general, I truly don't believe the killing of one set of innocents justifies the killing of another set of innocents.
Right.
I agree with the slave killing their master. I don't agree with the slave killing their master's innocent children.
Right.
I don't agree with two wrongs just don't make a right.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't really know throughout history many examples of resistance movements that have been successful through violence. However, what troubles me about this is going to go on and on and on in an endless cycle unless, and we saw this with George Floyd, for example, completely different. But at the end of the day, we had amazing protests and we all thought finally something's going to change, and things fizzle out. Yeah. Just like unless something remarkable happens, these protests will fizzle out. And that's what Israel is banking on. That's what Biden is banking on. That's what a lot of the pro-Israel lobby led by AIPAC is banking on, that the American and other countries that have been protesting, their attention can only be captured for so long.
For so long.
Move on to another cause. But I don't particularly think this cause is only about the Palestinian people. I think this is about something bigger. It's about imperialism. It's about occupation. It's about human rights. It's about genocide. And I'll be honest, I love my mother. She was not happy that I used the term genocide about this.
But it is what it is. I mean,
I said to her, what would you call it? Bombing refugee camps? What would you call it? Bombing markets? What would you call it? Bombing on or next to hospitals? I don't call that precision laser.
No, I mean, Netanyahu used the term that he wants to thin out the population. What kind of rhetoric is that?
Mow the grass. Mow the grass. Yeah.
Mow the grass is like the 2014 one. Yeah, this rhetoric is 100% genocidal. Are you kidding me? Let me tell you right now, if this was anti-Semitic people, folks saying this about Jewish folks, people would be up in arms, as they should be, because it is genocidal. But I just don't understand how we got to this place. I mean, I do, but I don't. It's unfathomable to me that.
Yeah. And she said to me, I hear you, and I'm not trying to pick on my mom. I love her, obviously. But she said to me, I hear you saying all this genocide, this, that. I don't hear you talking about the hostages. Why aren't you so mad about them? I said, two things could be true at once. Right. I care about the hostages. I want them released. I don't think that these old ladies who were kidnapped and children who were kidnapped, they are not responsible for what the British did in 1948 or what the United Nations did in 1948. They're just trying to live their lives in Israel. I'm not blaming the Israeli people. My wife's Israeli. She's got family there. You shouldn't, we can't, it's not guilt by association. And of course, I hope our audience cares about the hostages. And most of the protests we've covered, the pro-Palestinian protesters are calling for the hostages to be.
And you even have family members of hostages saying they're not okay with the bombing and the collective punishment. Collective punishment is a war crime. It solves nothing. And you're right. It ultimately will just create more terrorism.
So I said to her, I don't know if you know this, but you could have two thoughts at once. Like, I'm against what Hamas did. I understand, people like Norm Finkelstein, who I don't agree with on a lot of things, and others who kind of are more sympathetic to, violent resistance. But I'm opposed to that. But I understand why they hate Israel. I understand why they want revenge.
Right.
However, at the end of the day, to me, I'm a human before I'm a Jew. Right.
Right.
And that's what makes me not a Zionist. And as a human, I am against innocent Jews being killed, innocent Arabs being killed, innocent Christians being killed, innocent aliens being killed, innocent people being killed.
Period.
By the way, while we're doing all these protests for the occupied Palestinians, how about we do some protests for the occupied Native Americans right here in America?
I agree. I mean, listen, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, did you see this just got expanded?
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody's paying attention to this.
Americans have been put in their own less dire concentration camps. They're called reservations. Right. Most of them don't have running clean water or electricity. And that was America. And we're all on occupied land here.
Yeah,
so
we're a colonized state as well. I mean, the point is you can't dismantle the colony.
Yeah.
But we can try to do something about reparations and justice and whatnot. And we should be doing that. In fact, not to change the subject, but the film Origin, Ava DuVernay's new film is fantastic. It talks about many of these topics. It's based on Irene Wilkinson's book called Caste. When it comes out, I highly recommend people seeing this. It's very educational, informative. But, what is it about human beings where they need to put each other into boxes, have some sort of hierarchy where they other people, and that makes their disdain for them acceptable? Like, this has been a universal theme throughout human history. We're in the United States, it's taken the form of, Native Americans and reservations, slavery. In Nazi Germany, it took the form of obviously the Holocaust. In India, it's the caste system. So there's examples of this repeatedly happening over and over again. And who benefits from that? So anyway, it's a very interesting film.
All I know, and by the way, we're about 100 subscribers away from 167,000. So if you're watching this and you're new, please press the subscribe button, click the bell for all notifications. Hopefully we can get over 100 of you to press that subscribe button so we get to 167,000. But to me, I mean, ultimately, I think that two things. Number one, I mean, you and I have talked many times, we do not live in I don't believe we live in a true democracy. Our government has been purchased. But at the end of the day, the United States could stop this within the next 5 minutes.
Oh, I agree. We could
call
absolutely stop this.
I
We
didn't
have the power.
Netanyahu and say we're not sending any more weapons. We're not sending any more. I don't credit Ronald Reagan for many things, but he did do the right thing in 1982. He called I forget who the Israeli prime minister was, but as Israel was
I want to say Ariel Sharon.
No, it was Menachem Begin.
Oh, yes, that's right.
He called and said, "No more. Stop your bombing of Beirut," I believe it was. So, and I understand there's people on the other side to say, "Well, Jordan, if Israel gives up the West Bank and Gaza, look what happened in 2005. Israel left Gaza and they started shooting rockets and this and that." I'm not saying this will be.
Well, I'm not saying it'll be easy peasy and there'll be no acts of terrorism. Of course there will be. There's been many years of pent up anger, but that doesn't condone genociding the entire population and not trying for peace, in my opinion.
I mean, frankly, this is your beat. By the way, everybody tune in at 5:00 Eastern. Tina will be hosting right-wing insanity report. Hey, Timothy McVeigh blew up Oklahoma City. Should we go occupy whole neighborhoods of white supremacists or whole states?
No. Yeah, which was my point earlier about the American redoubt and bombing all of Idaho to get rid of a handful of. That's just not a solution, right? If anything, go ahead.
If you pull out of Gaza, if you pull out of the West Bank, of course, and actually give them self-determination, their own state, their own government, the things that any people deserve. Yes, there might be isolated acts of terrorism, but the masses who are no longer blockaded in, who could come and leave as they wish, who could fish more than 5 miles fishermen are allowed to fish in Gaza.
Yeah.
They might not like those acts of terrorism. They might turn against those.
Right. Yeah, the majority of these individuals do want peace. In the West Bank, the same is the truth. Do you think they want to constantly be attacked by settlers, argue with the IDF, go through 3-hour checkpoints? There's an area in Hebron where the IDF has welded shut their front doors. The Palestinians have their doors welded shut because it faces a settlement. And these individuals, it's crazy. They have to go up on the roof of their building, climb down on a ladder to another building, to their roof, and then climb down the ladder onto the street to get in and out of their homes because they can't use their front doors. How insane is that? I mean, this is just but one example of the life for these individuals under occupation is unlivable. It's truly unlivable. And unless this stuff is addressed in any meaningful way, I think we're going to see much more terrorism.
But I got to tell you, and I said this to my mom, and she doesn't really have an answer. And I think my mom is very representative of a lot of American Jews who are very pro-Israel. I said to my mom, let me ask you, if you were in Long Island, where I'm from and where my parents still are, and there was an occupying force who came in and bombed your house, and I died, and my brothers died, and your husband died, and only you were left, would you just throw up your hands and say that's life, or would you want revenge? Again, I've already said I don't think it justifies going and killing innocent people, but I said to her, what makes you think, all right, bomb the hell out of Gaza, get rid of all their tunnels. What makes you think the Hamas, eradicating Hamas, what makes you think you are not then tripling Hamas?
Right.
With all the living, who's left of the Palestinians taking arms and wanting revenge. And then you're just doing this over maybe in a few years, only much worse.
That's what happens. It keeps getting ratcheted up for this very reason that you're talking about, right? The PA was, there was a time when they called the PA an extremist organization, and they weren't extreme whatsoever. They were beyond reasonable. Are you kidding me? But, in ways that we've seen Pied Piper routines happen in the United States with political campaigns, Israel did the same thing. They elevated Hamas because they knew in the long term, and this is all readable if you actually cover real coverage on Israel. There's Israeli journalists there that get their hands on documents and whatnot. You can find these conversations elsewhere, just not in the U.S. media. But, here's an example of them elevating Hamas because they know, well, if we elevate them, we can pin all Palestinians in Gaza now being terrorists. They voted for them. Look at the terrorists. They're all terrorists. Now we can bomb them. We can take the land. So that is sort of the thinking that goes on, right? This is all very much political. And these people, they're extremists. They don't care if at the end of the day innocent people are killed. They want their end goal to be this. I mean, truly, the extremism in Israel is what we're seeing there is the extremists are much worse than what we see with the Trump people here. I just need people to understand how insane these extremists are. They really are, and they're in control of the government right now. So imagine, Trump meets Mussolini, and that's our parliament. What happens next?
Yeah. Before we wrap, I want to show this clip. This was one of the clips. And if you guys watching don't know, we've covered at least, at this point, John has covered at least 10 pro-Palestinian protests all over New York City. I think he covered one in DC. We were out covering one live last night. A United Auto Workers call for ceasefire. I believe there was hundreds, if not a few thousand people there last night. So we've been covering it live. So if you subscribe to the channel, click the bell, you'll see when we're live. I believe he'll be covering another live protest this weekend. So John Farina has been doing a great job for us. But there were pro-Israel protesters last night. And John got in, I don't think it was like super heated, but he interviewed a pro-Israel counter protester. I thought it was kind of interesting. I agreed with some of what she said, actually. Let's play that clip.
Okay.
The media doesn't let us through.
What side are you on?
I'm Palestine. You don't like it, huh? You don't like it, huh?
Are you the Chariton?
Yes, I am. I am very proud.
Wackos.
Oh, why?
Why are they wackos? Why are they? Because I have one thing to say. He should offer himself in exchange for the hostages. Let him offer himself in exchange for the hostages.
So how do you feel about Israel killing those 3 hostages?
I'll tell you exactly how I feel. That in war, terrible things happen. That a huge percentage of soldiers are killed by friendly fire. War is chaos. It was not deliberate. It was not deliberate. And the mother of one of the hostages came out and said, I forgive you because war is chaotic.
So would you support a ceasefire?
If you give all the hostages back first, give the hostages back. Do you support taking children as hostages? Do you support that?
Do you support killing over 10,000 children?
I don't support killing children anywhere. But guess what? In Berlin and in Dresden, children were killed too because it was a war. This is a war. If you don't want children to be killed, don't start a war.
So in exchange for the hostages, you'll support a ceasefire?
Every hostages come back, I'll support a ceasefire. First, give them back. And by the way, barbaric behavior, rape, murder. What do you want Israel to do? Say, sorry, don't do it again? What would you do if it was your daughter or sister? What would you do? You wouldn't go to war for them? You wouldn't go to war? What is this for? What are you doing?
YouTube. On YouTube.
I have thoughts. What are your thoughts?
I have lots of thoughts. Again, with the problem I have constantly with just the general framing on the discussion, and that is that this is a war between 2 sovereign nations. It's absolutely not. We need to stop looking at it that way. This is an occupied territory that has been under military blockade and occupation for a long time. And that needs to be considered in this discussion. I think what Hamas did is absolutely an act of terrorism. And there are ways to deal with terrorism that don't include blanket bombing the entire territory and killing children. It doesn't make sense. If you really cared about the hostages and getting them back, you wouldn't be doing that. How many, what's the count, Jordan, on hostages that have been killed by some of these bombs? I saw a report on this a couple of weeks ago and I can't remember the number, but that's inexcusable.
I don't even know if there's a true way to know at this point.
I mean, that's crazy to me. Like, how does this achieve anything? The other part of this is how the ante gets ratcheted up, right? All of this is so very much reactionary at this point. The IDF has taken young Palestinian children as prisoners, interrogated them, kept them in jail cells. We're talking children as young as 8 and 9 years old. So again, when that happens, that increases the anger on the Palestinian side. And oftentimes it's not necessarily justified. Well, honestly, with an 8-year-old, it's never justified. We'll table that for now. But again, this this is so problematic on both sides. There's no way to reach peace if you're constantly othering the other person. And I do think part of the problem is that U.S. media doesn't report in a sort of authentic, as I think the word I'm looking for, an authentic way about this, because they're afraid too many times.
Right. You know, to me, I think that woman, who I have nothing against, I think she's very representative of how a lot of Jewish mothers and people I grew up with are, you know, who
same. Yeah.
temple on the high holidays, maybe aren't like super religious, but are pro-Israel. I think, honestly, of my mom. And the first thing I would say, and it's funny you said it because this is what I was going to say, a war, and a lot of wars are different depending on the war. A war is fought by two armies. Right. And yes, collateral damage happens and innocent people, but it's generally fought on the battlefield between two armies that some armies are stronger than others and can defend one another, can defend can defend itself better than other armies, have better weaponry, whatever. But generally, again, two armies that both have weapons and people die, but that's rules of engagement, and people, you know, there's battles and soldiers die or survive or get their legs and arms chopped off.
Right.
This is not a war because one of the sides can't defend itself.
Right.
One of this, yes, technically, you know, Israel would say Hamas is a terrorist army, but Gaza and the people of Gaza, and let's not forget, there's extremism in the West Bank too. They can't defend themselves. There's bombs, you know, showering over their homes and markets and camps and yada yada. So it's not really a war. You could say Hamas in this instant started it, but then you go through the whole discussion. Well, Israel started it because they are occupying, and it's this endless thing.
It's an endless cycle. Yeah, I mean,
one side right now cannot defend itself. Period. End of story. Number two, I actually think it's reasonable, and I've heard at the protests we're covering, the pro-Palestinian protesters also call for the hostages to be released.
Yeah.
But I don't think you could call for a ceasefire without the hostages also being released. I think that's reasonable, what she's saying. But I'm tired of hearing this. Well, look at what happened in Dresden, and look at what happened in Germany, and look at what.
Right. That's not, I mean, why should Palestinian people pay for what the Nazis in Germany did? This is a prime example of hurt people, right? It's just that never ending cycle. And it's unfortunate. It's really depressing to me, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, technically this is the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust, but 6,120,000, I'm not minimizing the loss of life. 1,200 people is tragic. But we're talking about bombing Dresden after a world war. We're talking about 6 million Jews murdered.
Also, Jordan, I have this thought in my head that I've had off and on for a couple of weeks. I'm going to run it by you right now on live TV. Part of me wonders if even framing this conversation as being one about being Jewish versus being Israeli occupied government is really the way to frame it. I mean, do you really believe that everybody in Gaza is anti-Semitic and hates Jews? Or is there a problem against a repressive occupying regime that's keeping them in check, and that's the Israeli government? I mean, I do feel like some of this is a conflation, because the conflation serves Israel, right? If the more we can tie it together, this idea of everybody that's our enemy is anti-Semitic, the more we can do the things we want to do. That's sort of a right-wing, extreme right-wing tactic, right? No matter
in a way, it's the same gaslighting. You know, after Iraq, the leftists suggested you're anti-American. Obviously,
that's how that feels to me. Do you think that's crazy?
Right, but like, you're anti-American if you don't support the troops. No, you're not. Right. You're not supporting the troops. You're supporting them by wanting them not to go over based
and die for no reason. Yeah.
So you're not un-American for being against war, just like you're not anti-Semitic for being against the Israeli government's actions, or the United States government's actions. I mean, like I said, my wife's Israeli. She has family in Israel. I'm not against the Israeli people. I'm not demanding they leave. I'm demanding the settlers leave the West Bank and Gaza. But Israel proper, sure, there is a lot of people that want all the Palestinians to return, and
There is, yeah. People need to understand that. Again, no group is monolithic. There are forces inside the state of Israel that are saying the things that we're saying. And in fact, some of them, like my friend Ronnie, is even more extreme. He would say that groups like Breaking the Silence, B'Tselem, I can't say that very well, that they don't go far enough, right? So yeah, no group is monolithic, but we only hear about this because it serves American foreign policy, right? This is an example of, we're only going to show you this one viewpoint because the one viewpoint not only serves the government in Israel, but it serves the U.S. foreign policy for what we want to do there. If we propagandize enough of our population, and they're constantly saying things like, I think a prime example of Israel has the right to defend itself. I don't know who coined this phrase. I really don't, but are you kidding me? Stop with this phrase. Stop it. It doesn't serve any purpose. It's a nonsense phrase. Like, nobody thinks any nation doesn't have a right to not defend themselves, but you use this to justify offensive attacks and other things that have nothing to do with defense. And that's quite clear to anybody paying attention. So, but again, that's just, if we use this phrase enough, we're sort of Teflon coating ourselves, from any sort of criticism that might be valid or, viable. And then on the flip side of that, you're making it very difficult for us to fight anti-Semitic tropes as well, because all of the white supremacists, and we've been talking about this week, they're very emboldened by what's happening right now. It gives them this like cover to say, see, we told you this is how Jewish people are, right? And I don't think the right-wing extremists in Israel give a shit about that, and they should. It's a very dangerous game, in my opinion.
Yep. So, listen, I don't know how this ends. I mean, if Biden genuinely, it's very clear Biden doesn't care about the human cost. But if Biden cares about the political cost, because at this point, if the election in America were held today, Trump's going to become president again, Biden would lose. I don't think Israel, Gaza is the only reason. There's a lot of reasons Biden is going to lose. But I think in particular, in some other places, America's role in enabling this could be the determining factor. Right. If he loses Michigan by 10,000 votes, you don't think that those 10,000 votes, most of them might be coming from Dearborn?
I guarantee
or Detroit, which has a significant Muslim community. There's other cities. Philadelphia actually has a Muslim community. There's other cities, not as much as Dearborn. And when I say Muslim, I mean Arab American, because not every one of them practice Islam, but you get my point.
So, I get your point. And some of the framing that the Biden administration has used has been really upsetting, very terrible. I'm thinking of, that time a couple months ago when this first started, where the, I can't think of her name right now, the press secretary was trying to, connect the Palestinian people to Nazi Germany. It was really offensive. It's like, what are you doing here?
But to me, I think this is not going to end. The only way to end this, in my view, is if these protests continue. And frankly, just like in America, I say we need to economically organize.
Yeah.
Hey, protest with your wallet too. If you wanna, if you are not, you got to protest the U.S. politicians. You got to protest the companies that are supporting directly or indirectly these weapons.
Not just Jordan. I mean, do people realize that there are American companies or multinational companies that have set up locations in West Bank, in the occupied West Bank, where they hire the Palestinian labor for less than what they would spend elsewhere? They're chasing the lowest wages that they possibly can. That's insane to me. These are workers that are being taken advantage of. They're not protected in any way, shape, or form. This is a thing.
I would just say, in my view, I'm not religious. I've never been religious. I think I've gone to temple once in the last 2 or 3 years. But to me, if you are a Jew and you are more religious than me, or if you are a Zionist who believes the Jewish people need a Jewish homeland, I don't subscribe to that, but that's fine if you do. At the end of the day, I believe as a Jew, part of being a Jew is operating under the assumption that all life is precious.
Heal the world.
I'm not like all lives matter here, but it's not just Jewish children that we need to protect. It's not just a Jewish homeland that you think you should protect. you should be outraged when you are seeing innocent children, the elderly, women, whomever slaughtered.
That is a core belief in Judaism, right? Heal the world. The fact that that's being lost in this conversation is really tragic, honestly. What do you make of, I can't think of the name of the organization, the Orthodox Jews in New York that are against Israel because they think the Torah explicitly teaches that there shouldn't be a Jewish homeland?
Oh, if you look through history, a large volume of Orthodox Jews are against Zionism.
Yeah.
A lot of the Orthodox community, particularly in America, has always been against Zionism in particular, because Zionism isn't really about being a religious Jew. It's about being a nationalist.
Right. I
don't know the name of that group too, but that's not new. There's been groups of Orthodox people in New York and elsewhere that have protested the settlers, the increased settlement in the West Bank and Gaza and parts of Jerusalem. That have protested the occupation since 1967. I think it's good that they're out there.
Yeah, I do too.
And we need to be clear, because a lot of people might have forgotten this. Before Israel became Israel, when it was the British mandate of Palestine, even before it became the British mandate of Palestine, and it was the Ottoman Empire ruled that land. For a long time, Jews and Arabs
lived in peace.
Lived peacefully.
Yes.
I'm not saying there was never any tensions, but there were Arabs, predominantly Arabs, because obviously that land, Palestine, was majority Arab, but Jews lived there. They were neighbors. They farmed.
Christians.
In some cases, they farmed together. So there is history of Jews and Arabs living peacefully next to each other, just like there's history of Jews and Christians living peacefully next to each other.
Yeah.
That has been lost because of the last, 40, 50, 60 years. But
I agree.
I don't know. And to me, I don't have the answer, but I know in my own personal life right now, I'm not going to lie. And I'm not saying woe is me. I have it fine compared to the people of Gaza, but it's difficult. I've talked to you personally. Like, I love my father. I love my mother. I love my older brother. And some subjects you could just say to agree to disagree. Both my parents voted for Trump. My dad is more MAGA than my mom, but I don't agree with them, but we don't really talk about it anymore because what's the point? Let's focus on love and them being grandparents to my kids and, my kid, not kids.
Wait, is there something you weren't good to? I was going to say, is this an announcement?
And let's focus on, the good things. Let's not focus on the bad things. But obviously it can't be avoided now. And my mom has told me how disappointed she is on what I'm saying and this and that. And I said, well, number one, don't watch if you don't like what you're hearing. And number two, I can't twist myself into a pretzel and my integrity.
No, nor should you have to. I mean, and really, this isn't about being Jewish. It's about the fact that the community isn't monolithic. And there are a lot of right-wing Jewish folks. I think a lot of people are realizing that now. But there's been this idea that's been put out there that Israel's just a giant lefty kibbutz with, hippie folks that are like, yeah, that's not the case, right? I mean, that might have been in the, 60 years ago part of the landscape, but that, again, this is all based on a lot of misinformation, bad reporting, stereotypical beliefs being sucked into those things. And I just,
it's also based on human nature. We are in many ways what we're raised. My father, I love him.
Yeah.
My grandfather was a Zionist and raised my father.
My grandfather, who is a Holocaust survivor, was not a Zionist. He was the exact opposite. He was against Zionism. So
sometimes you're raised a certain way and you get out of that. And sometimes you're raised a certain way and you absorb it. And that's who you become. Right. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but in many cases, we are what we were raised as. We are what we've experienced. We can't get out of those mentalities. Unless we're exposed to new information and new people and yada, yada, yada. But I'll just say, I'm just tired of, it's kind of gross. Every time I see footage and you don't even see the worst of it on CNN and those places, which aren't showing it, but Al Jazeera and these other places.
It's upsetting.
Honestly, some of it looks like scenes I've seen out of the Holocaust.
Oh, 100%.
Where you're seeing this rubble and children with missing arms and their face half blown off. And who can make excuses for that? Who could justify that? There's no justification. Now, Tina, on a brighter note, Tell the 800 people watching.
Wow, we have that big. Oh, early morning. Who knew?
Why should they come back at 5 o'clock Eastern?
Yeah, 2
for
Pacific.
Your
So
hosting the Right Wing Insanity Report. You have a very juicy show today.
I think so. So I'm going to be speaking with Oliver Lee Bateman. He is a journalist that I used to work with at Washington Babylon years ago, but he kind of got sucked down this post left to right dissident. I don't know what alt-right, whatever you want to call this pipeline for a hot minute, then left it, and now he's talking about it. So there was a piece that came out in these Times this past week that Jeff Shartlett with another writer wrote that I read. It's a great piece, and I'm like, Oliver's in this. I'm going to reach out to him and see what's going on with him. So we're going to be talking with him today about that whole experience.
About one-time hardcore lefties.
Yes.
For many reasons, kind of got sucked into the right-wing pipeline.
Right.
Some of those, in my view, are grifters, but some legitimately.
Oliver agrees with that. Yeah, they're grifters. And it's not necessarily about the media grifters that are doing that. It's about who they're taking along with them, right? So, and it, like one of the points he made to me was that, you can only look at George Wallace memes so many times or post George Wallace memes so many times, in an ironic fashion before you start to actually believe maybe there should be two separate water fountains. And I think that's kind of sums it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody tune back in. That's about hour 45 minutes from now. Tina will be back hosting that. Also, reminder, December 30th. So next Saturday, not tomorrow, next Saturday, we're doing our end of the year marathon live stream starting around noon Eastern time, Saturday, December 30th. So get your eggnog, get your gingerbread house, get your latkes, get whatever the hell is your vice, whiskey. I'll certainly be drinking. We're going to start at noon Eastern. It'll be myself. Tina will be on. I believe Ron, I'm hoping, Placone, Louis DeAngelis, Colin will be here. John Farina, I think. We'll have guests. And we're going to do a year-end wrap. So we're going to cover all the stories we covered on the ground. The United Auto Workers strike. Tina was in Atlanta twice covering the Cop City police terrorism compound, which, by the way, they will be cross-training with, I believe, the IDF.
That is correct.
We'll be covering East Palestine, Ohio, where Lewis has gone and covered 4 times in Ohio after the chemical bomb that was detonated in February. Obviously, the Israel-Palestinian protests we've covered on the ground. We've covered so many other things on the ground. Colin right now is working on our end-of-year montage, which he does a great job on it. So please put it in your calendar. Next Saturday, December 30th, noon Eastern. We'll also be trying to fundraise because we got to keep the lights on here.
Speaking of, I think we have some super chats.
What's that?
I think we have some super chats before we go.
Thank you. So, Brent, $2. That guy with New Zealand accent is so creepy. I don't think I have a New Zealand accent, so
I think he meant the guy in the video. No, am I wrong?
Is that Rials? There was a small protest even in Bahrain today. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Been protests all over the world. Hussein again, 5 Rial. Israel is losing morally, tactically, strategically, and militarily. Thank God Israel exposed an ugly fascist face to the world, and they hate it. I think the main word in there is morally. I think they've
lost the plot. No, they've 100% lost the plot. Like, it's just like you mentioned earlier, whatever sympathy existed for the hostages and what happened dissipated in the face of what they've done in response. And that is absolutely the case.
Yeah. Karen, $1.99. Thank you, Karen. Bren, $2. The fact that never again is used as justificati. I think you meant justification. Absolutely. And thank you for the super chats. As a reminder, if you want more of our on-the-ground reporting, it's expensive. Help us fund it. StatusCoup.com/join. You are who is paying for John Farina to be out there covering these protests. For Tina, when she went to Atlanta to cover Cop City. For me, Ron, when we were both on the ground covering the United Auto Workers strike.
Hey, I was there too.
Oh, why did I? Tina was out there as well. That's right.
Hey, man, I even ended up in a Bernie Sanders video of all things. I'm still laughing at that.
Very, very awful of me. I totally forgot. Tina was out there. Ron was out there. I was out. John was out.
John was out there. We were all out there at one point or another.
Yes. I didn't sleep last night, so minor excuse. But so definitely, if you can, support us, statuscoup.com/join. Thanks to Colin for doing this live stream, short notice. He's got to go let the dogs out. And again, we'll be back here. Tina will be hosting.
Oh, we have a New Zealand accent guy who works for Israel to defend them. So we have a clarification on.
Absolutely. So we'll see you back here, Tina, in about an hour and a half. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Have a good rest of your day.